Wi-Fi issue. Looks like we should be good to go now. This is why you always come on early before go live time to work out the kinks. The technology always is so eager to provide. All right. All right, David. I see that you came on. So I sent you a message, David, just in case you haven't done this before. I believe you need to go live on your end first, and then once you're live on your end, then I should be able to invite you. And
Oh, appreciate the heads up there.
How's it
David,
going? How's things?
you doing good, man. Doing good. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. I had a couple of people wander into my live video, and I was like, I'm not staying here. Go and watch me on a different channel.
Well, I believe the way it works is they'll if people are checking out your live, they'll see it on from your side, or if they're checking out from my side. So it's we both have lives going at the same time. We're just co-hosting. So I mean
Oh,
they
excellent.
can watch from either side. So if you see comments on your side, I probably won't see them. So if you see
Right.
comments in your stream, feel free to respond to those or whatever if people are asking you questions. So,
Okay.
and I'll try to do the same from my side. But man, how you doing today?
Very good. Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you joining me. So, just for the listeners out there who might not know, where are you checking in from today?
So I live in Galway in Ireland, so on the west coast of Ireland. So it's actually tomorrow for you. I'm in the future.
I love it.
No, it's good. I was up pretty late this morning because I'm just recovering from COVID, and my son now has COVID, so he was just wiped out this morning. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna catch up on some sleep while he's sleeping as well.
Oh man, what's his name? Because I love to pray for him later.
His name is Ollie, so Oliver.
Ollie.
Um,
Okay.
he turned 4 at Christmas, so he's okay. He's doing fine.
Okay.
He's just tired this morning, and that was pretty much it. He's you wouldn't think anything of it. Like, he was like, what is this thing that I've got? It's like, it just means you don't go to school for a week. And he was like, this is great.
This is great. Yeah, I know my kids have all been through it, and it's like 12 hours later, they're running around jumping and they want to go play and do all that stuff, right?
Right, and I had it last week, and it was like, and he was sick. He had the we don't. There's someone from Galway as well, Gary McDonough. Hi, Gary. Um, there's we don't vaccinate for chickenpox in Europe, so he had chickenpox last week. So I had
Yeah.
COVID last week, and he had chickenpox. So I was looking after him, and I was like, I just want to sleep. I was like, I've never been so tired in my life, and this week he's like, yeah, I feel great. It's
Oh,
like,
I mean, they
oh,
recover so quickly, thankfully.
they do, yeah, they do. They do.
Oh, that's awesome. So I definitely appreciate you coming on tonight. And as the title says, it's authors unscripted. This is super casual. There's no format here. This is just an opportunity for viewers to get a chance to know a little bit about you and your books and kind of what got you into this. And so the questions might be completely random, but like this is really, I want this to be an opportunity for you to really steer this. And I definitely want to talk about this here. So this looks familiar to you.
Sure.
So I haven't had a chance to dive into it yet, but if you want to talk about this tonight, that would be great too.
Yeah, sure.
So how long have you been an author?
Not really that long actually. My first God, what year are we in now? 2022. It's like it's so weird the last couple of years. It's kind of like what year is it now? It's like it's the same. I keep thinking it's still 2021. I know 2020 happened, and it's like 2021 is like it just felt like it went on for about 15 years. And it's still not over. But so yeah, I started writing just as the pandemic started. So like writing to be published, I'd done a little bit of I'd actually written. I was doing creative writing lessons. So my son was born at the end of 2017, and I'd been working in upper retail management for years, and it was just something that I'd been doing that I was good at, but I hated it. I just like got no joy from it whatsoever. And so when my son was born, my wife has the career. She's a lawyer, as you'd say, over that way. So when she was about to go back to work after maternity, we kind of decided that I would stay off and look after my son, which
Okay.
delighted to do. It was like it's better than what it's much more rewarding than upper retail management. I mean, I went to university and all this kind of stuff to do other things and just didn't do anything with it. And But then I was kind of like, well, I'm going to be in the house like with someone who cannot speak. Right, and just basically like sleeps and wants me to feed them and change them and everything, not talking to anyone else. So I'm going to lose my mind probably. So I was like, I need to do something, and I'd always been a big reader. I'd always been wanting I always had ambitions to write something. But it was one of those things where it was like, I'll do it in the future once this thing has happened, which I don't even know what this thing was. Once that's done, I'll do it. And it was always the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Um, so when I was doing this, I was like, well, what's stopping me now? It's just excuses now if I don't do it anymore.
Okay.
So I started doing creative writing lessons in one evening a week. And purely it was just to go out to talk to people, like, just because I was, just to do that. And also then just to do this. And it was obviously it's an island, so a lot of the people that I was going doing these lessons with were a little bit older than I am. And their interests were not my interests, to an extent. Speculative fiction isn't very big in Ireland.
Okay.
It's mainly literary fiction and other stuff like that. So, but it was fun, and I was there, and I got a writing prompt one week, and it was I just had this idea of melding this writing prompt. I'm a big fan of like mysteries and unsolved crimes,
Okay.
and there was one that I've been like obsessed with for years, which is called the Somerton Man, which is like I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's like a body that they found in a beach in Brisbane in the 40s. I think it was the 40s or the 50s. And it was like to this day, there's like theories about it, but to this day they have no idea where this person came from. They were like from his blood work and everything that he wasn't Australian. They think he was like Eastern European. There was like they found like briefcases in the back of cars that had things removed from it and like little notes in it from the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Okay.
Right?
Wow.
Kind of stuff. And I've always been kind of like, well, what was that? So I was like, there was this prompt, and I was like, you know what? I'll write my own version of what the Somerton Man was, but I'll do it. I'll set it somewhere else. I'll set it in. I ended up picking Santa Monica because I wanted to do like a film noir kind of thing, but I
Okay.
wanted it instead of it being dark and rainy, I wanted it to be hot and like feverish kind of thing. So I
Okay.
started writing that. I started writing that the creative writing lessons, doing a chapter a week and bringing it in and reading it to them. And it took me a year to write it, and then um, finished writing it, and then I was like, well, what do I do? What do I do now? And then the pandemic started. I was like, well, might as well keep writing, come at home. Uh, so I started looking around for like submissions and all that kind of thing. And I was a big fantasy fan anyway. But I also like horror and I like sci-fi. And I noticed that a lot of the kind of submissions for short stories were more horror, sci-fi, that kind of thing. So I started doing that. Um, Started getting a lot of things published pretty quickly. I think in by the summer of that year, I think I had about 50 things accepted from, but in a number of months, like short stories and like from like 100 words to 10,000 words. And then I just started working on a couple of fantasy novels. One was an urban fantasy one. One's a uh, epic fantasy, which is the Solitude Shadow. Both of them were accepted by publishers. And so
Okay.
was the one that I actually worked on, the Santa Monica Man one, which is called that's coming out as well. I think maybe next year. Um, so I was pretty lucky, really. It was just one of those things. I just kept on writing. I had the time to do it. Especially when the pandemic started, there was nothing else to do, and I just, kept on doing it, and just got lucky with people accepting the work, and um, so really, like for probably in 2019. Long story short, 2019 was probably when I started writing properly, and then writing to publish was like 2020.
Um,
Debut novel came out in actually had two novels out in the space of a month in 2021, which was kind of crazy. It was like should have spread it out a little bit, but it was like here's one in June and here's one in July.
I can imagine doing that to myself. Just one release is enough stress. So,
Right, yeah. Thankfully, they're both from the same publisher, but they're like they're both fantasy as well, but they're different types of fantasy. And it was like kind of it was one of those things. It was like now knowing what I know a little bit more experience, I would have been like, well, I'll focus on one series and get one series kind of done before moving on to another. But I guess I just like to. I kind of like I like to take a break from one thing by working on the other thing. You know,
yeah.
so. That's the way I kind of work, and then I ghost write as well. So like I have a couple of things going on at the same time, and my own work, and then I'll do like Empire of Ruin, the dark fantasy, and then I'll go on to the urban fantasy, and I'll do a couple of those back to the other one. And it's yeah, I don't really do short stories and stuff anymore.
Okay.
I still have stuff coming out in anthologies and everything, but it's stuff that I wrote like a year ago. Right?
Okay.
It'll
Okay.
come out.
That's cool.
I'll get like an email one day saying, "Here's your contributors copy," and I'm like, I thought this came out a year ago."
Oh, that's cool. Now, you talked about a lot of your shorter work when you were doing that a year or two ago, being picked up by different, publishers, or was it publications like magazines and stuff? Where was a lot of that being picked up at for the short
Um, there's,
fiction?
yeah, there's a couple of magazines. See, again, knowing what I do now, a lot more of fancy stuff is magazine based, which I didn't really realize at the time, and I would have probably looked at that. But there was a couple of I did a couple of lit fiction things for like Irish stuff because I was like, should really get something published in Ireland. From seeing as I'm half Irish and I live in Ireland, I was like, oh, I should do that. So I wrote a couple of real kind of like real life kind of things. But most of the stuff was in print, ebooks and print from various different small presses, like one that I will not mention because they're not a great place. But I had quite a lot of things with them at the start, and then the publisher that I work with most now is Erie River Publishing. I had a few things, although actually I got the most rejections I've ever had from writing is with them, and they're actually my publisher. I'm just like, so, but that was good. That was good because they were my first rejection that I ever got, and it was really kind of I got some really good feedback from them. But then I got rejected again by them. And then the next story I sent to them, I got rejected as well. But then it kind of finally clicked what they were kind of looking for. Sometimes,
Okay.
because the things that got rejected ended up going to other places. And sometimes it's one of those things. It's like really kind of study what it is this place wants, and not
Right.
everyone's the same.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was a lot of different places, but it was mostly ebooks and print that was going in. I think it was ended up being. I think I'm in about 130 different anthologies now, or something like that altogether.
Oh my goodness.
So it was pretty, yeah, it was pretty intense for a little while. It was yeah, it was just writing for these deadlines and these open calls for a lot of time. And it was like yeah, just finishing stuff, sending it away, doing two or three, four, five different stories a week, short stories. Yeah, so it was pretty. But then, but then it's kind of like I don't regret it because it's good because you get to learn all these. You work with different people and you learn about different things and like obviously people start kind of noticing you a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
But I got to the point where it was like I'm writing 10, 15,000 words a week, 60, 70,000 words a month, and like I'm getting paid 50 quid or whatever, like $50 or whatever, whereas I could be writing books for
Right.
the same amount. I'm getting paid more, right?
Right.
But it's one of those things. It's part of the learning curve.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's good to get the exposure and get the experience. I mean, get your name out into the industry. You'll pick up readers along the way. But man, it's it takes a while for most of us before there starts being any income that actually is worth the effort.
Right.
You really have to enjoy it, right? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
especially if
yeah,
you're
yeah.
small press or indie. You know,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you have to really enjoy it, and it is one of those things as well. It's like I see a lot of time. There's a lot of people. I'm in quite a lot of submission groups still at the moment, which I just kind of just look at just to see what's kind of going on. But I see a lot of people that you'll get like a new small press that are like, we'll it's $10 for something or whatever, and they get like loads of people giving them loads of crap about it, and it's like, everyone has to start somewhere, right? It's
right?
like
Exactly.
you're not gonna just start and be like, but some people do this. They'll be like, it's not worth if I'm not getting paid professional prices, it's not worth my time. But it's like, you need to kind of also practice and
Yeah.
learn about the submission process and all this kind of stuff. And it's just some people just can be so um, too blunt, I think, with these places. Like, everyone has to start somewhere. Even the small presses, they have to start somewhere. Um, they don't just appear and they're like, we're able to pay everyone like $100 for like your 5,000 word short story. It just doesn't happen from the start.
No, I had an experience that I really enjoyed, right in that along those same lines. So I think it was 2 years ago now. Yeah, so I guess maybe in 2020, I was approached by a buddy of mine who they run Knights of the Northwest Publishing. It's the Dragon Band anthologies. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yeah,
Have
I
you
am.
done
Yeah,
any
yeah.
work with them?
I've not. No, I've not.
Okay.
Again, it was one of those things that I was more kind of doing horror,
Oh, okay.
particularly horror,
Yeah,
sci-fi, because it was. I just found it really hard to find fantasy anthology places
yeah,
that wasn't like kind of like shifter stuff and all that kind of things. And I was like,
for
do
sure.
these even exist? Like,
Yeah.
do they exist? And then when I started publishing my own novels that I fancy, I was finding these places afterwards, and I was like, I would have loved to have seen these a couple of years ago.
Well, that's it. That's exactly right. If it's not romance or shifter or something or urban fantasy, it's kind of hard to find in the space that we write in. But with Dragon Band, I had some author buddies who had written for them, and they're just getting started. And even though they had a few big name authors like Richard Knack wrote for them,
Mhm.
he's done World of Warcraft books, he's done Diablo books, he's done Dragonlance books and stuff in the past, or stuff like that, and he was gracious enough to write for them as they're just getting started. But the rate that I got
Right.
was really just about the opportunity to write for them. I mean, they did pay
Sure,
me.
yeah,
They,
yeah.
they were fantastic to work with, but it wasn't about profit. That's for sure. So, So I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I mean those opportunities can be great though, and the networking and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure, yeah, and that's part of the thrill of it is just to kind of meet other people, right? Because
Yeah.
like when I started kind of when my fantasy novels got picked up, I was kind of like, right, I really need to kind of find where all the fancy people are kind of hanging out, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not just meaning readers. Like I was in a lot of different groups for like readers, but like Wheel of Time groups and Lord of the Rings groups and Brandon Sanderson groups and all these other things. I was kind of like, where's the where's the other authors? Where are the ones that are just like fancy authors? So it's like I need to find these because I need to talk to them and kind of say, well, what would how did you start out? What did you do to do this? What did you do? How is it you're like, you know, releasing a new book and you've already got like 500 reviews on Amazon before it's even out? No, this kind of stuff. And it took me a while to kind of find them. And I made some mistakes with my newsletter and stuff. Like I really, when I set my newsletter up, I got quite a lot of people subscribing to it early on, but it was very horror based, and it was like I kind of felt bad. And at one point, I just sent out a news on one of my updates. I was like, "This isn't going to be very horror based anymore, right? There's not going to be a lot of stuff. So if you want to leave and unsubscribe, then do it because it's not going to really be for you uh, anymore, unless you like fantasy or urban fantasy."
Yep.
Um, and I had to kind of reshape my newsletter and all that kind of stuff. And but it was one of those things. It's like you have to learn from it. And um, one of the things as well is because I loved fantasy so much was when I started kind of writing, I was like, I don't think I'll be good enough at writing to kind of do fantasy. So I was like, I'm just not
Oh,
going
okay.
to do it. But then every time that every kind of short story I was working on, it was getting more and more like towards fantasy or dark fantasy in particular. So it was all kind of creeping in. And then I did find one fantasy anthology. And it was actually with Erie River Publishing, who I'm with, because they were going to be doing an open call for fantasy novels. So they did a short an anthology called with Fire and Ash, I think, or Blood and Ash it's called. And I was like, right, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it. It's only 10,000 words. I'll try it and see what happens. And that was my first one. It got accepted. It was the first story I got accepted with them as well after a couple of bounces with the horror stuff. And I was like, all right, well maybe I can do this. And so that was kind of there wasn't really much looking back for fancy after that point.
That's awesome. And I want to get into the fantasy stuff in a second, but before we do that, I
Mhm.
just want to let you know I definitely feel the pain of making some mistakes with the newsletters. So before the GDPR was officially law, I had a good
Right,
sized mailing list that was like, it wasn't huge, but for me being a small time, a few years back, I had like, I don't know, like 4,000 or so subscribers before that went into
right,
law. And then I changed my mail service provider to a better, more robust service because the other one just wasn't adequate anymore as I was growing. And then the law went into effect, and I had no proof, no burden of proof for the fact that these people
right.
opted in. So I lost almost
Yeah.
all of my subscriber list through that process and had to start
Oh
all
man.
over again. And it took me like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years to even get to that point. Lots of giveaways. I had done a lot, and I was like, and so I was before the law went into effect, I was like kept sending out emails like saying, please opt in so I have proof that you want to stay. And nobody was clicking
Right.
on it. So
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah,
basically
yeah.
had to start all over again. So I feel your pain in that regard. So
Yeah, yeah.
um,
It's a wonderful, wonderful time to watch all those people disappear and go, I have to pretty much start this again.
yeah, it was painful, but I
Yeah,
was like, well, I'm in it for the long haul, so we'll just one step at a time, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So I have here your book. I showed this off earlier. So in Solitude's Shadow, this is the first book of the Empire of Ruin. I haven't read this yet, so I don't want any spoilers tonight, but I picked this up based on recommendations of other authors in the IFA, the Indie Fantasy Addicts Facebook group. For those that are listening, if you're on Facebook, the Indie Fantasy Addicts group is great if you just want exposure to lots of diverse fantasy authors that maybe you haven't heard of. This was highly recommended by multiple people, and so I picked it up for this summer's reading challenge. I haven't touched it yet, but what would you like to say about this book, this series, this world, whatever? What would you like to tell us?
Yeah, okay. So it's first book of four. Um, it was a trilogy. At one point, it was envisioned to be a trilogy, but when I was working on the second book, which is out in June, um, when I was getting towards the end of it, I was like, because the second book is quite a bit larger than the first book, and it was larger than what I planned it to be. I was kind of looking at it, I was like, I don't think I've got too much story left in the plan for it
Okay.
to just be in one more book, unless the third book is like 300,000 words long, which, I don't mind doing a 300,000 word long book, but I didn't want to do like the first one 70,000, then the second one 140,000, then the next one double again. I didn't want to have that like kind of uh the third book ended up being more than three times the size as the first one. And I also, when I was kind of working on it, I was kind of like, there's a definitive arc I can do with the third one within the kind of the story. So it's four books. Second book is done. It's out in June 18th. Well, I say it's done. I've written my drafts of it, and it's now with the editors. So we'll be doing that. We're kind of working on that at the moment, but it's done. It'll be out on June 18th, and that's called Path of War.
Okay.
Um, and the third book is going to be called Beyond Sundered Seas. The fourth book is called At Eternity's Gates, and it's basically it's my love letter to fantasy, really, all the things that I love about fantasy. Um, Dark fantasy as well, but it's kind of, someone described it very early on when it first came out in Soldier Shadow as grim dark with hope, which is kind of the balance that I wanted to strike. I do like grim dark. I mean, Joe Abercrombie's probably, out of modern authors, is probably my favorite.
Okay.
And he has a lot of he has a lot of humor in his as well. He goes to some very dark places, and he has some very unscrupulous characters. But he is great with humor. I want to do the same kind of thing, but instead of the humor, which there is humor in my books, I think it's important. But I wanted to have the aspects of hope in it as well, where it's like, you know, the good guys, or the ones that aren't so evil. There's a chance that they might actually pull this off. Um, and even when they fail, it might be, it's just one setback that the next time they'll learn from it or whatever. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's multiple POV. It's very, very character driven. There is action, and there's a big scope. But the first book was written in a way to kind of keep, it was epic fantasy in a shorter page count. It was what we
Okay.
were trying to do with it. To kind of just introduce people into the world and the kind of magic system and the characters, and the kind of backdrop of what was going on. So for that, I kind of made like a kind of a time bomb kind of technique to it, where it's like something is going to happen at the end of this novel that is going to be there. Everything is a countdown to it, and these
Okay.
different strands of characters are all going to meet up at this time bomb.
Okay.
Um, and then so with that kind of technique, the story can be tighter because everything is kind of feeding into it. And
Hmm.
at that, there's a mother and daughter relationship, and it's not like a child and a mother. It's like the mother is in her mid 50s and the daughter is in her early 30s. Like they're both adults, and they're estranged. for a reason that gets explored. And that's like this kind of central kind of relationship in the book where everything else kind of spins from. And there's other
Okay.
characters as well. Like that's kind of the main drive, the emotional drive of the book and everything else. And I wanted to do mother and daughter because everyone does father and son. Like everything is always daddy issues, right? And all this kind of stuff. And I wanted to challenge myself as well because I've got a son and you've got children. I know like when you have a child, your perception of things changes and what's important. What might have been important 5 years ago or 10 years ago isn't quite as important as it used to be.
Yeah.
Or there'll be things where you might be confronted with certain scenarios where you would change, you'd do something a lot differently. Now you've got a child, and I wanted to kind of have that question at the center of the entire thing, and have it at like a very kind of macro scale and a larger scale as well.
Okay.
Um, where it's like that question of what do you do for the things that are important? What are the decisions that you make, and what are the lengths that you'd go to kind of justify
Mhm.
those decisions. So that can be like, between a mother and a daughter, a father and son. It could be between an emperor and his empire. Um, it could be all these kind of things. Historians with the history that they write, what is it that they do? Do they write the correct one, or is it one that they're trying to teach a lesson with? So there's all these kind of questions that are going on in it, in the book. And then the second one kind of makes that a lot larger because, not to go into any spoilers, but because of how the first one finishes, where that kind of time bomb narrative and structure is ended, the characters go on their separate ways. So it becomes a larger scope, and that's why the book became larger because, like, you
Okay.
have to kind of give these people their own stories that have like a definitive middle, of beginning and end, and all this kind of stuff within the larger arc. And you're able to kind of go around the world a little bit more then and kind of like shine a bit more of a light on things, which will continue with the next couple of books as well.
That's awesome. I think, you talking about that question that you're asking about, what lengths will you go to for your children? Like, that's a very
Mhm.
powerful storytelling tool to use, right? So you can really, I'm sure, pack a lot of emotion into that storytelling.
Yeah, I try to explore it from different angles as well. Like I say, like if I started, I've never written before I had my son. He's only 4, but like if I'd started writing 6 years ago, for example, that wouldn't have been something that would have occurred to me, or it might have been, this might be quite interesting to do, but it would have not been as genuine because I think the thing is as well, like when you have children, one of the things that no one really tells you about is that like you're not always going to agree with your other half about how to be a parent, right? And some things that they think is normal and right, and it's the right way to do. You're like, that's kind of strange. I'm not sure I agree with that, and vice versa. And to kind of really kind of, and they can be very like mundane things, right? It's just like I think he needs to wear a hat today because it's kind of cold. It's like, well, it's April, it's not that cold. He'll be fine. He's got hair, right? It can be just as small as that. But then to kind of dramatize that and bring it into a larger thing where you have like um conflicting opinions about magical people, potential, or other things like that, is interesting. And also the thing as well with that is that people have friends and other members of the family, and sometimes those people will agree with a decision made, and sometimes they won't, and they're not shy of letting you know about it either. So that's things that kind of get explored in it. And it's like I say, it's a theme that I would never have touched probably, if I'd started writing a little bit later.
That's really cool. So I want to go back to something that you said earlier, and I think maybe you and I had talked about this before. You said you like to describe it as grimdark with hope. And I have a similar tagline I use in my own work. Um, but I would love to hear your perspective on why you think it's grimdark with hope versus maybe noble bright, which is what I generally consider that I write. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, because I'm sure it's a nuanced answer.
Yeah, it's something I've thought about quite a lot actually. And when I first started writing this, it was kind of like I was kind of like, it's dark fantasy. It kind of straddles the line of it's not Mark Lawrence or Joe Abercrombie or Anna Smith Spark, which is very, very, you know, most of the people in those books are unlikable. Even like with Joe Abercrombie, even like Logan Nine Fingers, like the Bloody Nine is essentially a terrible person, right? And the only reason that anyone kind of likes him is because he's got split personality syndrome, and one of his personalities happens to be all right, and that but he's a mass murderer, really.
Okay.
And then the other main character that you kind of follow is Glockter, who is a torturer, and he's the best torturer, and he that's what he does. He gets a lot of pleasure from what he does. So you have these kind of things. And obviously, Mark Lawrence's books. You have
George.
George, who is a terrible person, right? And even Mark Lawrence himself has said that, like, if he was any other kind of book, he would be the antagonist in most people's books because he's not a great person. So and that's where you kind of get the divide with Noble Bright as well. The people in that are essentially good people, and there is that divide of good and evil and everything like that. So what I kind of wanted to do in my book was I wanted to explore a lot of grey areas, but I also wanted to kind of, like I said before, give that kind of impression that even if there was a setback or the protagonist failed, there'd still be like that kind of chance for the reader where it's like, well, this might actually turn out okay, or this. But the other aspect of it as well, where it kind of is more dark fantasy grimdark than Noble Bright, is that my like good characters
Mhm.
are complicit in this terrible um machine of war, basically, that powers this empire which they live in. Um, where they live, is a continent. It's an island continent called Haltveld, and they've been in kind of like a state of kind of. It was split into duchies for a very long time, and there was
Yeah.
humans and elves living there, and this city state. There are also like duchies and city states with them. One of them kind of rose and started to swallow other territories, a bit like Rome
Okay.
um, did. They're very are based on Rome in a lot of ways, and I'm a big history fan, and I was kind of looking at that and kind of doing, well, let's kind of twist it a little bit, whereas like Rome would take in another culture and go, you're okay still believing in this as long as you pay us your taxes and this and this, whereas like my help vote is kind of like, you have to do what we say and pay
Okay.
us taxes.
Okay.
Right. Okay. But what they do as well is, because what their outlook is basically, if they're always at war, um, it makes people more pliable. The common person, they're able
Okay.
to kind of be like, one of the characters at one point in the book says that, like, the common person will happily give away their rights if they think that because you're at war. If you're at peace, they'll be like, why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting this? Why am I
Right.
not getting this?
Yep.
So one of their kind of main methods of control is to kind of always look for a new enemy or a new target. And at the center of this continent as well is an order called the Order of Sparkers, which is basically their religious belief center, but it's also magical as well.
Okay.
And these people believe that they were given this gift from their gods, and it was like part of the scripture is that they are to be like healers and teachers, and they're only to use it in defense. But obviously, the Empire think differently, and they've been kind of like trying to push them to use them more as a weapon as time's gone has gone by
Okay.
like putting them in the front line in war instead of having them as like support. They stick them in the front lines so that they're under attack, so they have to defend themselves and what have you. And as time goes on, there's kind of newer sparkers that I kind of like. You know what? I quite like fighting. I think this is quite good, and this religious stuff is bullshit. Basically, right? It's just old dogma and what have you, which is driven by the Empire because they're trying to create this kind of schism in it.
Okay.
Um, so the main characters in this, there's from the POV characters, two of them are sparkers, Colleen and Zana, which is the mother and daughter, and one of them is a politician. But they're all complicit within um, this arena, I guess is the best way
Okay.
to kind of describe it. Um, and they have different thoughts, and some of them are like kind of like, I don't really agree with this, but they still do it because it's like, well, I serve the Empire. And
Okay.
part of their arc then is kind of awakening to the reality of this and what it is that I want. So I think that's where it comes into the grimdark part, apart from the noble bright one, because none of them have got that kind of. None of them are fighting against evil at the start of the books or anything.
I
They're
gotcha.
all happily well, not happily, but they're all like, this is life. This is what we do. We're soldiers. We're this. Um, Two of the characters kind of have a discussion after coming off the front lines, and they're like, I don't really agree with this that we're doing, but one day this culture is going to be gone, and no one will remember it, and it'll be our fault. But what are we going to do about it?
Okay. Okay. No,
Right?
I like that though. So yeah, I can see why you say grimdark with hope. I get where you're coming from. That makes a lot of sense. So when
Yeah.
you've talked about Joe Abercrombie, Mark Lawrence, so what are some of the other influences that you had that maybe influenced the Empire of Ruin in particular?
Wheel of Time would be the big one.
Okay.
Like I'm a huge Wheel of Time fan. I was one of these people. I started reading it in about 2000 when I was 16 or 17. I started reading that, and it was just, I think, book 10 was just out or just about to come out. And I kind of worked my way up to it through fantasy. I'd like, read Tolkien, and I'd read all of Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and what have you. Eddins, Robin Hobb. I think I just read Robin Hobb just before Wheel of Time, and I struggled a little bit with that originally because it was a little bit. A few years before it, I tried to read Thomas Covenant
Yeah.
when I was about probably 14 or something, and I was like, this is not enjoyable to me. I was like, Thomas Covenant is a terrible person. I was like, why am I reading about this guy? I went back when I was older and I got it. Then I was like, yeah, I get this now, and I understand that like you don't have to read a book that has a nice person as the main character. You can read flawed people, but at that point, I was very much like, epic fantasy, high fantasy, heroes versus villains and what have you. So yeah, I read Robin the first Farseer trilogy, liked it, struggled with it in places. I say I was only 15 or 16, um, and then I was like, yeah, I want something just a little bit more kind of along the lines of Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
So I've been seeing advertisements around places around town and bookshops for Wheel of Time, and I hadn't really heard about it at this point, other than these things, because this is when the internet was just first started coming around. So I picked up. I think I was working my weekend job. I was at college and university at the time, and I picked up the Eye of the World on my lunch break. Tore through it, read it all through the night. Um, Back in work the next day, so it was a Saturday when I got it. It was back working again the Sunday. Was reading on my break, reading on my lunch, and then I was like, man, my next afternoon break, I was like, I'll finish this tonight. I have to go and get the next book because I'll be. So I went out to the bookshop and got Great Hunt and the Dragon Reborn. Um, Read through them all, and I was like completely hooked on it. So I was one of these people. Then I got up to where the books were released, and then read them all again. And then every time a new book was announced, I would read the entire series again before the new one came out, and then read the new one, and then do the same thing again. And obviously, then when Robert Jordan died, there was bigger gaps before Brandon Sanderson brought out the first one, so it gives lots of time for rereading. So yeah, I think I've read Wheel of Time over 20 times at this point, I think. So that was a big influence, and it was exactly what I kind of needed at that point as well, because it was, it starts off very Lord of the Ringsy, and it's lots of Arthurian legends in it as well, which was big for me because Arthurian legend was one of the first things that I kind of got into, which we could call fantasy.
Okay.
Some people call it historical fiction, but it's not based on history really. Like it's let's face it. And so it had a lot of that in it. Got a lot of Tolkien, a lot of Norse mythology, which I was very interested in as well. And then it starts to become its own thing after like the third book. But it was what I wanted because it kind of had that. Oh, hi Neen, how's it going? It had that. It had that gentle high fantasy, epic fantasy feel, but then it was like, there's something else going on here. You'll get it soon. And then it went into that more complex kind of thing where it was like Rand's journey becomes very, very um, ambiguous, I suppose, as it goes on, particularly towards the Sanderson books. And then you spend a lot of time with some of the villains, and you spend a lot of time in different cultures and all this kind of stuff. And it really kind of expanded um, my horizons. And then in between those books, then I was going off to read more like game Song of Ice and Fire had come out 2003, so I got into that. Went back to read Thomas Covenant, read the next Farseer ones. But Wheel of Time is a big influence in general, just in and especially when writing Empire of Ruin, particularly the second book,
Okay.
just the way how he handles multiple POV.
Mm.
Because some of those later books in Wheel of Time, there's like maybe 25 different POV characters in one book, right? And mine aren't that big. I think Path of War, I think there's 5 different POVs in it, but we mainly focus on 3. But just that how his foreshadowing is excellent as well. He's such a great foreshadowing. That's something that I tried to learn from. But the way he kind of weaves POV together in terms of like and some books don't work, especially his early books. He does it in he changed it in different ways in terms of like how he was doing it. Like maybe one chapter, the first book is almost entirely from one character, and then
Okay.
the second one there's like little chunks, and then the third book it's like all over the place. But then from the fourth one onwards, he kind of like started doing like kind of maybe 2 or 3 chapters at a time from one character's point of view before and telling like a little story
Okay.
before moving on to the next one. And that was something that I was like, yeah, I'm going to try and do that with Path of War because it was longer. Like Solitude Shadow was easier because it was just shorter book. So I was basically there was 3 POV characters. So I'd go Zana's POV chapter, Colleen's, Cade's, and just keep repeating it that way because you're never
Yeah.
away from them for too long.
Right.
Whereas with Path of Walk, it was longer. I was like, I don't want to do that because it's too choppy, in my opinion. And Joe Abercrombie did that in his last trilogy, and I struggled a little bit at the start of it because I was like, I'm not getting to know these characters well enough because
Yeah.
it's so jumping too much. But then I was like, I don't want to do huge, big chunks at a time either, because it'll be like you forget about what's going on
Yeah.
over here or over here, over here. So that was like something I kind of went back and kind of looked at some of those books and was like, okay, how did the good writers do this?
It's
And
tricky.
what
It's
worked?
tricky. POV is something that I really struggled with. With my first book, I didn't take creative writing courses. I didn't study. I just said, "Hey, I'm going to write a story," and it ended up becoming a book. And my first, I was like, epic fantasy. There's going to be lots of characters. I've got to introduce all these events that are all happening simultaneously, and then
Right.
people who read Dragon's Fire, my first book, there's some people that if they're not really versed in epic fantasy, they could be turned off in the first 5 chapters because they're already in like 3 or 4 point of views. And I had to learn
Right.
how to get better with that. But it's really difficult if you have all these simultaneous events and the timing is really critical. Like you're having this convergence, like you're talking about like a time bomb type of event where everything's converging to one point, and it's
Mhm.
challenging to do that to where you have this cohesive story where readers can connect to one character for several chapters, but then, oh crap, these events happen. I need to go back in time almost, right?
Right. Yeah. One of the things I learned pretty early on within Solitude Shadow, and again, it was easier because it was a shorter book. It's only 70,000 words, which is it's funny. You say it's a shorter book, like for most genres, like horror or thriller or whatever, that's like a normal sized book.
Right.
For fantasy, it's a little bit shorter. But because of the way it was, I was kind of like, well, you're never going to be that far away from a character. But what I learned very early on was, and I can't remember where I picked this up from. It was I can't remember but I picked it up from another writer that kind of I noticed did it in their work was that it's okay for nothing to happen in someone's storyline at some point, right? So you can go like, okay, well, nothing happened with this person for a few days, so I'm just going to go on somewhere else for a little while and then come back to them when something happens.
Right.
You don't always have to be like, oh, and this has happened to them and this has happened to them, and oh, well, while we were away with this character all these things happened as well. It's like, just think about real life. There's days in your life where nothing happens for a week at a time, right?
And nobody cares.
And nobody cares. So and it's tricky to do them because obviously you want to kind of have tension in the story as well, but you can just do that tension with the other characters, the other story strands.
Yeah.
And like, so the first book is dealing with basically, again, it's not really a spoiler 'cause I think it's on the blurb. There's basically like a siege going on somewhere, right? And what do we know about sieges is that nothing happens for a long time. People are just waiting, right? So I was kind of like, so that was handy because it was like, well, nothing is some siege. If we go to Tolkien, the siege of Barad-dûr at the end of the second age, the last alliance of elves and men lasted for 17 years before Sauron came out and was like, oh, maybe I should come out and fight these guys, right? So, you know, that doesn't happen. It's not 17 years in Solitude Shadow, but there's lengths of time in sieges where it's just people stood around waiting for something to happen, right? So it was one of those things where it's like, don't force it. We can go away and we can put tension here and tension here and tension here and progress this storyline and progress this storyline, and then come back here and be like, okay, well, this is where the story is starting again now for this one.
I think that's really good advice. I'm actually writing a siege scene in my current whip right now. And we had like the first battle of this siege, and this is not going to be a quick thing. It's they're very well fortified, and it's going to be long and drug out. So it's like a little bit's happening, and then we're going to go visit the other characters, and we're going to go and
Right.
see what's happening in the rest of the world, and then we'll come back
Yeah.
several chapters later and like, oh yeah, they're still fighting, and
Just,
so
they're just waiting there. No one's doing anything, right? They had a little bit of a fight, and they were like, "Well, this isn't worth it. Let's just wait for a little while." That's essentially what it is, like, and it's one of those things where it's like, you just don't force the story where it doesn't need to be forced sometimes, and I think that's one of the things that you were saying before. Sometimes when you do pick up some fantasy books, and why it can feel so dense to people that may not have read fantasy before, or maybe they've read Harry Potter, or maybe they've seen Game of Thrones on TV or Wheel of Time on TV, and they're like, yeah, I'll give this a try. And they'll pick up one of the books and they'll be like, I'm lost straight away.
yeah,
Because some people, and this is some experienced authors, are like, if Robert Jordan did it in Eye of the World, it's like, here is a ton of information right off the bat, and it's like,
yeah.
it's Stephen Erickson with Gardens of the Moon,
I was going to ask you if
is
you
one
like
of the.
Steven Erickson.
I do like him. I think I wish that he'd been a lot more upfront about the structure of his series at the start, like when it was like, this is going to be 10 books, but also you're going to have to read seven by this other guy who's not as good as writer as I am, and
And they're interspersed
and
somewhere in between.
so, right, yeah. And then there's going to be spin-offs and all kinds of stuff, and you're like, right, okay. And it's like, and some of these ones from the other guy who's not as good as me, you have to read because some of the characters get killed off or go to different places. If I'd known that at the start, I'd have been like, well, maybe I'm going to give this a miss, but no. Yeah, read it a few times. Gardens of the Moon is like when you pick that up for the first time, it's nigh on incomprehensible, right?
You're not
Because
kidding.
yeah, because you literally are. I mean, we talked about sieges. You're literally brought into the middle of a siege, or it's the end of the siege. It's just finished, and
But you
it's
don't know
like
what the heck's going on.
no, nothing at all, right? Nothing. There's an emperor that's maybe just been assassinated. There's this thing going on. There's like a big floating fucking city in this part of my language in the sky. There's like different armies. There's different races. There's like people that have just died, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and it's like a magic system gets mentioned straight away, and yeah, it just makes no sense. And then by the time of the you start to get a handle of what everything's going on in it, the book is over. And it's like, here's the second book, which is set in a different part of the world with a completely different cast of
That's the
characters.
characters.
Uh,
Yeah, you're like, am I
yeah,
even reading the same series?
right. And it's a great book. I mean, Dead House Grates is a fantastic book. It's
It
one of
really
the
is.
best books in the series. It's an amazing ending, real gut puncher of an ending. And then the third book is like, well, we're going to go somewhere else with this other characters that we've not met yet, and we'll do it again. Then it's like, well, I think it's the sixth book. Reaper's Gale, I think, is the first book where.
Well, I haven't finished the series yet, so no spoilers. But
All
I
right,
I
okay,
think I'm on Reaper's Gale, but I had to take a break. So
right, okay. Well, if you're on Reaper's Gale, then you know, like Reaper's Gale is the first one I think where it's kind of he brings people in from the different various parts of the world and lets them meet.
yeah.
Like six books into the series, it's like we're gonna let these people meet each other now. And it's like, I think which one is it where it's like I think it's the fourth one where it's just like it goes like like it just goes to something completely different, and it's the barbarian dude, and it's like you don't
Uh,
even realize it's in the
Karsa,
same
Karsa
series. Yeah,
Orlong.
yeah, and it's like is this even the same series anymore, right?
Right.
And then there's the bloody. Oh, I remember reading the Memories of Ice, and I can't remember the name of the race. You'll know it, the name of the race, but it's basically I was reading it and I was like. These sound like zombie velociraptors with blades for hands, but
Yes.
that can't be right.
The- oh, I know
So
exactly what you're talking about too.
yeah, so this is like about 2006, 2007. So the internet was a thing then. So I was like, this sound like this, but that can't be right. I must be misinterpreting this. So I Googled them and found some fan art, and they were in fact zombie
Zombie
velociraptors with blades for hands.
Velociraptors.
It's like this series is wild.
I think my favorite part of the series, and I need to finish it, and I certainly haven't even touched the his partner's books. But reading is it Midnight Tides, maybe where you meet Bug and Tehol and
Right?
Ublala
Yeah,
Pung and that whole
yeah.
again different part of the world, totally different characters, and you're like, what does this have
Right.
to do with anything? But
What does it
those
have
are
to do with everything?
no, it
Yeah,
doesn't. But those are two of the funniest characters. That's like one of the funniest character
right.
duos I've ever read.
Yeah, yeah. They're my favorite. Teho my favorite character in the whole of the series. And yeah, and it's funny because like it's a lot in style. Those bits of the series and that book in particular is so different to everything. And then when he finally like lets these characters meet up, it's like this shouldn't really work, but it does. But then there's other aspects about that series that I really kind of struggle with in terms of um even before I became a writer. I think when you kill off a character, it has to mean something.
Okay,
Um, and I think part of his magic system is that like death can sometimes be ascension, which I think is okay as well. I think that's fine because it means something. But it all people don't stay dead a lot of the time. And there's one character in particular, I won't mention who it is for spoilers, but there's one character in particular that gets killed at least four times and brought back. And
okay.
each time their death is just like more. over the top than the last, and it's kind of like, what has this person done to Steven Erikson? Like, why, what is he doing to him? Why is he? And it's one of those things where you kind of get numb to it because you're like, well, he's going to come back, and he's going to come back. But then he surprises you with one of them because he does also at one point kill off one of the big characters, and you're like, they're going to come back because everyone else has come back, and they don't come back, and you're like, well, I actually would have liked this one to come back.
I know my brother is a big fantasy reader, and he has more time because he listens to audiobooks while he works and stuff, and he consumes
Right,
way more books than I can. And he was like, "This series is so good, but man, the ending pissed me off." And I'm like, "Well, don't tell me about it." But yeah,
right, yeah.
he's like, "There's just so
Well,
many things that weren't
yeah,
resolved."
yeah, because they're all an Esselmonth book. That's why. Because it's like we're going to be releasing a lot more books afterwards, and it's like great. That's fantastic. But yeah, it's one of those things. Like I think like the resurrection and ascension trope is a big one in fantasy. A lot of people do it, and like I've kind of toyed with it a little bit in some aspects, but I think like a physical death needs to mean a physical death. I think when you have a fantasy world, you can get metaphysical if you want to, and you can get abstract, so you can visit like other planes of existence and this. But I think like once like a character's body is dead, they should stay dead. And I think Erickson just crossed the line a little bit for me with that one. It was like, come on now, just stop.
At least four times.
4 times is just too much.
Oh man, that's awesome. We had a comment here in the chat a few minutes ago. You were talking about sieges, and Greg was saying he was saying the same thing about sieges in Game of Thrones, how they can just
Right.
go on and on forever. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
hit that. So I know that it's close to an hour here. This has been a whole lot of fun. I just wanted to say to anybody who's listening on either side of the live, do y'all have any questions for David before we wrap up here? If you do, please put those through either in my chat or through his. See if we can get those answered before we wrap up the live. Also, what I'd like to say is for those that have tuned in on either side of the live, thank you for hanging out with us. I'm going to try to do these little unscripted, fun little book chats every couple of weeks with different authors and stuff. Really appreciate you coming on tonight, David. But if you are listening right now, please take a moment to follow David, and also go check out his books. I have this. I'll just show it off again. In Solitude Shadow, this is the first book of the Empire of Ruin series. I picked it up just a few weeks ago based on a lot of recommendations from other authors, and I'm really excited to get into this with the Indie Fantasy Challenge this summer. But yeah, check out David's work. Follow him here on TikTok or whatever social media platforms you have. Where can they find your books if they want to buy some, David?
They're all on Amazon and all those other kind of places.
Okay.
The best place to check out though is if you just check out my website, which is davidgreenwriter.com,
Okay.
and it has links to everywhere there, and my social media and stuff like that. They're all in one little happy place.
Awesome. Awesome. So davidgreenwriter.com.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and I think actually on my profile on TikTok, there's the little link tree
Okay. Okay.
thing that'll
Cool.
send you all the places
All
around the
right.
internet.
So y'all that are following, like I said, please give David a follow. Check out his different videos and check out his links for his books. We do this because we love it, but y'all support. It's a little bit of icing on the cake, I guess, if you will, and it helps us keep going. So I did have a
Yeah.
question that came in from old Greg 45. He asked, "How do you come up with the names of your characters?"
How do I come up with the names of the characters? So some of them are just I like the sound of them, right? It depends, right? It depends on what series I'm working on. On my urban fantasy one, which is based on Earth, they have to be a lot more like real.
Yeah.
right? But I also like names that bounce. So I like a short first name and then like a surname that has like at least three syllables. I'm weird. I'm autistic, so I like to look at this kind of stuff, right? So like in my urban fantasy novel, the main character is called Nick Holleran. So it's like Nick Holleran. It's like a nice like kind of bounce to it. But then because of the way the world is set, there's like other like fantastical creatures in there where I can kind of look at like myth and legend and use names there because a lot of them basically the premise of that world is if you've read about the thing, it exists in the world, right? So like Nick says
Okay.
that at one point, like if you've heard about Bigfoot, it exists. If you've heard about this, it exists, right?
Okay.
Except for werewolves. Werewolves are bullshit, right? He says that at one point. I was like, just the one thing that isn't right. But then in the fancy ones, yeah, it's a bit more tricky because the first thing is like and I love fancy, right? It's one of the great things about loving fancy is poking fun at it. Sometimes is you pick up some books and you look at these names and you're like, I have no idea how to say this name because it's like three letters, an apostrophe, another couple of letters, another apostrophe, and it's like why, how and why, right?
Oh man.
And what's great about that is you go into those kind of like fandoms and people argue about the names, right? They're like, no, that's not how you pronounce it. This is how you pronounce it. And like Wheel of Time being the perfect example, you listen to the audio books and the narrators are pronouncing everything differently every single book. Because
Oh,
and like Robert Jordan was like at some conventions, it's like, right, you say this name like this, and people are like, no, that's wrong. That's not right.
oh
And
man,
I've even
that's
done it
so
with my
funny.
own. Yeah, so that's one of the things is you want to kind of make them sound real and genuine and grounded, so it's not like this really kind of just like name that just doesn't make any sense. But also as well, you don't want it to be too far the other way where it's too normal. And one of the ones, an example I always think of that always pops into my head is Magician by Raymond E. Feist.
Okay.
You've got some you've got some like really kind of middle of the road names in there. Middle of the road, I mean like ones that are like not too fantastical, not too normal, like Jimmy the Hand or Arthur or people like that. But then you also have Martin, and, and honestly, it's like that's too normal, right? It's too normal. Um, so it's that kind of thing where you kind of look at it. But then what you have to kind of do then if you're building a world is that if you and naming a main character that is from a particular culture.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, you have to make sure there's consistency across all of the rest of the things that you name there. Um, so one of the things I did was for example, there's a place. One of the gods is called Ross, which is like Raas, and there's a village, a port village where they claim that's where he was born. So it's called Ardros, because home of Ross, right? So
Okay.
and everything then from that is kind of based around like they're all very kind of proud to be like this is where this person is from, and so everything is based around the name of Ross or the name of the gods. They're all very kind of proud of that, right?
That's
Um,
awesome.
and then yeah, so you kind of have to do it that way, and then one of the main characters in it is called Colleen Alpenwood. So that's like again, Colleen is like kind of fantasy, kind of like you can say it, you look at it and you can read it. It's not normal, but it's not unusual. And Alpenwood is like that could be a real surname, but it's a little kind of a twist on it. But then everyone from her region is kind of got that kind of um a name which is kind of based around like nature, I
Mhm.
guess. Like Riverbrook or someone, that kind of thing. But that's what Tolkien was doing, wasn't it? With like, the hobbits and Gondor and all that kind of stuff. Everyone has that kind of lineage name, and it's very much like, what's one of the amazing things with Tolkien is that you can read a character's name and you'd be like, well, I know where they're from because of the name.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I try to do that with at least in my Beating Back the Darkness series. Like the names, I really try to fit them to the culture, and Yeah,
Right.
there's not necessarily, I haven't gone as far as creating entire languages. There might be some phrases that I've made up, but like the
Right.
dwarves, their last name is going to be like Digwell or like
Yeah.
Ironfall or, bronze something, or it's going to be something that's very, exactly that's dwarvish or dwarven, right? So, and it's
Right.
different by the culture. So yeah, I like doing that as well. I am guilty of loving apostrophes a little bit too much myself, but I also try to keep them pronounceable. But I think it's funny, sometimes I'm like, okay, this is in my name, in my head I know how the name should sound, right? And then you hear a reader pronounce it and you realize that you've probably been saying the name
Oh
of
yeah.
your character wrong for a while.
Yeah, I've that happens with me all the time where people are like, "How would you say this?" Oh, they've heard me doing a live reading and like, "Don't think you're pronouncing that correctly." And it's like, well, I did invent it, but you're probably right. I am not doing it correctly.
Okay, so I'm not the only one who does that.
Yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it? Like you create the thing and you write it and all that kind of stuff. But once you send it out there and give it to readers, it becomes it's theirs at the end of the day. Then it's their interpretation of it, and it belongs to them to a certain extent. So you look at all these massive properties and that have survived over years. It's because readers have adopted them and kept them going when writers are taking 12 years to write the next books in the series and all this
It's
other
true.
stuff.
It's
It's
so
the
true.
readers that are keeping them alive by, theories and fan art and fan fiction and other things. So, if they all agree that we're pronouncing something wrong, then fair play to them. They will agree with those.
Yeah, no, I am on board with you because, I had, so it wasn't even because of the pandemic, but like there was a year, mostly last year, where I like pretty much my author hood or whatever kind of just fell by the wayside because my day job was so consuming. I had no time and certainly
Right.
no energy left. So like all my writing got put on hold, all my social media got put on hold, and it was readers like leaving comments and like just words of encouragement and stuff like that, and just like they're excited to hear the rest of the story. Like that's what helped me really be excited to say, you know what, I'm gonna find a way to get back into this. And like they give a life to this. We might create it, but like their enthusiasm and their passion for it, can give it a whole other life of its own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's yeah, it kind of annoys me a little bit when I see people like Patrick Rothfuss giving readers a hard time. And I know some readers can go over the top with it. That and some people that's just always in every day, every walk of life. But you see some people that just say to him like, they'll just tweet the most innocuous things, say, I really, really like the Wise Man's Theory, any update on the third book, and he like blocks them or goes on a big rant about it. And it's like, come on, like, it's been 11 years, right?
Right. Come on.
People can ask the question, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I think it is a complex uh, conversation about like, how much does an author owe the reader? And I think a lot of times it does come down to an awful lot. But I think the creativity thing comes into it as well. It's like, should you, how, you have to give the creative person a space if they're struggling or whatever and all that kind of stuff. But um, I think it comes, there's that thing is that if you market like Patrick Rothfuss did or George Martin does and says, okay, this is going to be a trilogy or this is going to be a series of 6 or 7 or whatever,
Right.
you're bringing people in, and it's almost like a verbal contract where it's like, buy my first book because this is going to be a journey, right? And I'm definitely going to bring out these next books. And then once they start to break that, then I think I think it's not fair on the readers because especially fancy readers, because fancy readers like series, right? They
Yeah.
like They like to be in for the long haul, but they also like to think that the series is going somewhere, right? And I'm
Sure.
sure you've experienced this as well. And I definitely have seen a lot of it, having, only the first book out so far and the second one out as soon as that you get a lot of people that are like, I like the sound of that, but I want to know when the second and third book is out. I'm not going to read it until the
Yep.
second or third book is out because
Yep.
they've been burnt so many times with authors where it's like, here's the first book, 5 years later, here's the second, 12 years later, the third
Right.
one still isn't out. And it's not fair. It's like, but on the other side of that, I think, when it's like 2 years, I think that's when it's like, back off a little bit,
Yeah.
give them the time to do it, right? But in some instances, the extreme ones, it's like, yeah, I think you've got a point in. I think it's about time to kind of update people on what's going on with this book and why it's taking you to why are you on Twitch every night and not writing this book that you've been waiting for, what people have been waiting for 12 years for.
Well, and I think that was a lot of people's frustrations with Rothfuss. Like, I love The Name of the Wind, and I'm not really like my favorite trope is like coming of age is not my favorite, right? And
Mm.
some of them it's very well done. I'm not super big into YA or whatever, but I really loved that book. I thought his prose and the way he did certain things from skill level with his writing. Some of the things that he just
Right.
did, the craft of the writing, I thought was just brilliant. I mean, it's been edited for 20
Mm.
years, so it should be good, right? But I won't read anymore
Yeah.
because I don't want to invest any more time. For me, it's time. It's not even the money. It's that I don't have a lot of time to invest in reading. So I don't want to invest that time to not be able to finish the journey, like you said.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like I totally get it, but he's had so much time and he has like the World Builders fundraiser and he's like you said on Twitch and he's
Yeah.
doing all these other things and people are like, "Yo, bro, let's get it
It's
together."
like, come on. Yeah, and even his editor is like, I've not seen it yet. I was at a convention recently. I was talking to the writers and stuff, and it was like the guy. I was talking to an editor of somewhere, and they're like, if an editor saw that, the book would be out a lot sooner because the guy clearly needs someone to come in and say, "Look, what are you struggling with? What is it that you need help with?" And the, there's a certain amount of enjoyment you can obviously get from a Song of Ice and Fire because there's some books in there that are like, tell a fairly defined story, and there's arcs that are obviously not finished yet and what have you. But the King Killer Chronicles, the way it's structured, you
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it's going to pay off. You don't know if it's going to pay off until you've read the third book. So you don't know if it's going to even work.
Right.
And you don't know if it's like, is it an unreliable narrator? Is it not? Because if it isn't an unreliable narrator, then Quoth is a terrible character because it's just like, I learned a new language in like 20 minutes. I learned this ancient martial arts fighting stance in like a week that takes people years to perfect. I fell into a realm and with the world's most dangerous creature that like turns everyone to sex slaves and became so great at sex that I sexed my way out of there. It's like so, if he isn't an unreliable narrator, is a terrible character. Um, so there's all these things about it, not even about like the story and the arc and where it's all going, that obviously has to be questioned, but the actual nature of the books themselves, of how the story it's trying to tell and the way that it's telling it, there's no idea to tell if it's effective or not until you've read the first book, the third book. And that is quite unique in a lot of ways because a lot of these longer series, they don't do anything different with the structure. They're all like book one, book two, book three, book four, book five, book six, that kind of
Right.
thing. This one is like a story within a story within a story with a storyteller telling it in a certain way that may not be true or not. We don't know,
Oh.
right? You gotta hope that it's not true because it makes it more interesting. If it just turns out that it's like, yeah, I was telling the truth the entire time, you'd be like, right,
Well, then
okay,
there's also the whole part of like, okay, that's great. He told you how he got here, but what's next?
what's
Like he's
next?
an
Yeah,
innkeeper.
exactly.
What's next? That can't be the end of the story. He did all these amazing things and now he's an innkeeper. What?
Yeah,
And then you're like,
yeah, and
oh, well, it took him 27 years to get the three books out. I don't think we're gonna get the what's next.
yeah, because he keeps on going on saying like, oh well, yeah, everything's really dangerous out here. The world's gone to shit. Everything, all this kind of stuff, and it's like, so how are you going to get around to telling that in the third book as well? I don't think
Right.
so. Like, how long is this book going to? Maybe that's why it's taken 12 years. This book, you're going to actually get a wheelbarrow and bring it to the shop with you and bring it back because it's going to be like 5,000 pages or something. Um,
Oh man.
but yeah, man, maybe we'll find out at some point in the next decade before
Well,
2030. We might find out.
my money is gonna stay in my pocket until then. But I do look forward to reading the rest of it. So we did have a couple comments, and I'll share these before we wrap up here. Sean Shera said, great answers. And this was back to when we were talking about, you were making mention of like the fandoms and how they really, that once it's out there, it's like they own it in a certain capacity. So I think that that's what he was referring to. And then old Greg 45 had asked the question, do you think Martin will actually finish Game of Thrones? And we'll let that be the last
It's hard.
question.
Yeah, it's hard to say really. 'Cause it kind of gets into that kind of really kind of ghoulish area of when it's kind of like taking bets on how long he's going to live, right? Which is like it's really hard. You don't really want to talk about that, but it comes into it because like he's an older guy and it's taken him it's been 10 years since 11 years since the last book came out.
Okay.
And this is what going to be book six, and I think is going to be 7 or 8 books or whatever. Like who knows? Like it's really difficult to say because it is like he's in his 70s now. Um, People obviously slow down at that age anyway. When they get to that, they don't, unless you're Stephen King, who just pumps these things out like it's nobody's business. But yeah, I mean, say it comes out, it doesn't look like it's coming out this year. I think we would have heard about it by now if it was. So say it comes out next year at the earliest, 2023. That's what, 12 years? Is he going to be around by 2035? Right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Is it going to take him that amount of time to write the next one? Is it could take him less? It's really hard to say. I'm would not be surprised if there's contingency plans in place because not so much from his point of view, but from the publisher's point of view, because the thing is with these kind of things, and I saw that midway through the pandemic, Patrick Rothfuss's editor released a blog, and she's also George Martin's editor, talking about creativity versus deadlines, and she didn't mention anyone by name, but she was talking about how uh, big companies, big publishers will set out their budget for the year, thinking, okay, well, Brandon Sanderson's got a book out, George Martin's got a book out, Patrick Rothfuss is supposed to have a book out. That'll bring in this amount of money, which we can go spend money on advertising these lower level authors, newer authors, or we can go and buy other authors
Yeah.
give them this kind of thing. And then when these bigger name authors have then missed their deadlines, and it's like, well, this book that we're supposed to have out in 2022 isn't coming out anymore. These publishers have then got a hole in their budget, and it's like, well, we can't spend this money on advertising this new author anymore, and we can't spend money on this and this and this.
Yeah.
So it has this big knock-on effect, which is what she was arguing. Patrick Rothfuss didn't take very kindly to it and kind
He
of
did
answered
not.
back publicly, right? Even though didn't name him, but we all knew. But it was a completely fair point. And so with the whole thing with Song of Ice and Fire is that's a huge to finish that series off, like not even for George Martin, but for their publisher is a huge thing, right? And if that suddenly is gone, as it has been for a long time, that's millions off the table that they can use for other authors. So I'm sure they have a contingency plan to be like, well, if this doesn't look like it's going to happen or something happens to George Martin, but like, let's hope that he does finish it because it must be it must be galling to him to have worked on it for so long and then the TV show to have overtaken him, which to an extent is his problem. But then for it to be so
Secondary.
hated,
Yeah,
Yes, everyone
that
hated.
too.
Majority of people hated the last couple of seasons, particularly the last one. And it's one of those things now. It's like, do people even want it to be done, or is the interest still there for it? And how different is his plan for it? You know, if he was saying to the writers of the TV show that, like, yeah, this is kind of what's going to happen to the characters, and they were kind of like, well, we have no idea how to get to that point, so
Make it up
we'll
as we
just do
go.
it, which is right. But essentially, like, you know, he might have gone to him, well, you know, Bran will end up being the king, and Jon will go up into the north, and Daenerys will be, you know, turned into like a mad Targaryen, and this, and this. If that's the same ending, then people already don't like it. But, you know, the execution will be different in the books. But I just get the feeling that he's just written himself into a corner where he kind of doesn't know how to get to the end what he wants to do, which is why it's taken him so long to do it. But I hope he finishes it, and I hope Rufus finishes his, gets the monkey off the backs. I suppose there must be a lot of pressure on them to satisfy so many people.
Well, I mean,
Um,
as fast as Sanderson's writing, he'll have the Cosmere done in about 3 more months. So maybe he can be hired to help those guys out.
yeah, it's fun. I've seen that loads. I've like people's like, Brandon Sanderson could do. I'm not sure Sanderson would be a good mix
I don't think so
for
either.
anyone to play, but I'd love to see who that a part of me does wonder that it's like, if they went to get someone else to do it, I wonder who is on the. I'm sure there must be a list somewhere, and like, right, okay, this is the list, and let's hope we never have to go to the list, but this is the list of people that we've got.
I'm kind of
I would
surprised
love
with
to see.
both of those guys that they haven't just solicited ghostwriting help, at least to some extent, and maybe they're
Right,
still in creative control, like kind of like James Patterson does, where it's outlined, it's plotted, there's key things that have to happen, but actually getting the words on paper, a lot of it's hired
someone
out.
else does it. Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, social far, like, I ghostwrite, and it's fun, and a lot of big name authors actually do have ghostwriters, because the name is basically a brand. Like Jeffrey Archer's another one. Um, my father-in-law did not enjoy me telling him about that.
Yeah.
But he still writes. So he doesn't write his stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe George Martin kind of did the whole TV uh the whole TV show thing turn him off from doing that. Maybe he might have considered it, but it's essentially already done. Yeah, who knows what's going to happen with that one? But yeah, I'd love to. Well, if you got the call off them, say, "Will you finish A Song of Ice and Fire?" What would you actually do it? Would you be like, "Yeah, I'd do that"? I think
Me,
I'd run a mile. I'd be like, "There's no chance."
well, me personally, as much as I would like that paycheck, no, because I write Noble Bright. It's just I wouldn't be the right person to tell that story. So
No,
no, no, not at all.
no.
Yeah, maybe if Brandon Sanderson decides to stop writing 45 novels a year and he wants to hire somebody, then maybe. But no, I don't think I'd be the
Yeah.
right guy to fill the shoes of Martin.
No, I don't think there's many people that can. A comment on mine, going, is Joe Compton says they can't even afford Peter Jackson, so he'd get Peter Jackson to finish off, to do to
Hobbit
do the
Peter
TV show
Jackson
again.
or Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson? Which one?
Lord of the Rings, yeah, maybe both of them, a double team on it. I wonder, I wonder what if they had the temptation of going, should we redo the last season? It's like, should we redo it? Well, because this House of the Dragon that's coming out, there's very little interest in it, and from what I've seen, is people just laughing at the wigs because they all do look ridiculous with the complete white hair, like all of them. It's just so strange looking.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is that a
That's the only thing.
prequel to it, or what is it? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so it's a prequel to it. It's about I think it's 200 years before um, start of Song of Ice and Fire, and it's basically like the demise of the Targaryens,
Okay.
which everyone knows the story anyway, because it's like we've all seen it. We've all been told it in the TV show and the books. I'm not a person who's against prequels. I think there's can be a very good story in prequels, and there's things that you can explore that are really great. I think Song of Ice and Fire World does scope for so many great spin-offs and great stories. Um, oh yeah, he's on about Joe's on about the TV. We're on about TV and the books, Joe. We're kind of crossing across both of them. But yeah, there's so many different stories they could tell, and I think the one that I think they had loads of them in development as well. I think they had like The Long Night was in development and some other things. And for me, they chose the most boring one that they could go with, which is like the Targaryens. It's like what really is there to tell about them that we don't already know?
They just heard the word dragons and they said, that'll
Right.
sell. That'll sell.
Yeah, they're like,
We can
dragons are
CGI
cool.
that.
Yeah. Dragons are cool. Dragons and white wigs. That's what else do people need?
Oh man, that's awesome. This has been a lot of fun, dude. I've really appreciated you coming on and us chatting through this. It's getting late for you, and I know it's late for me. So I appreciate it. I just want to say again, if you are watching this and you're not already following David, go ahead and follow him on social media. Check out his website, David Green Writes or Writer. David Green Writer.
Right there. Yeah,
Writer,
right.
davidgreenwriter.com,
Yeah.
and check out his books. Go buy his books, read his stuff, tell him how awesome it is, leave reviews, do all those things that us authors absolutely love. Helps keep us going. I appreciate y'all
Yeah.
for tuning in tonight, David. I know it's super late for you, bro, but I've appreciated this. Has been a lot of fun, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. As Joe will know, who's still watching it, I am a bit of a night owl, so it's all good.
Awesome, man. Well, you have a great night. Everybody out there who's tuning in, have a great night. We'll check you out on Authors Unscripted next time. Later, everybody.
Right.